For this year's installment of Hell March, we're going to cover the next game in the series, 1996's Red Alert. Fresh off the resounding success of Command and Conquer the year prior, Westwood moved to capitalize on the burgeoning series and get a sequel out. However, rather than giving players more of the same in a simple copy and paste production, Westwood tore the series down to the studs, completely reworked the game mechanics, and gave us a game completely separated from the previous entry. It was a bold strategy that could have destroyed the franchise and the company before either really got started. Did it work? Let's discuss. After the release and positive reception of Command and Conquer, Westwood knew they needed to strike while the iron was hot. The easiest thing to do would be to make a direct sequel to the first game, following along with the Global Defense Initiative's war against the Brotherhood of Nod. War machines don't die just because their leader was killed, and we could have gotten great content out of a game depicting GDI mopping up the Nod remnants and Nod trying to strike some retaliatory blow against overwhelming force. But Westwood didn't do that. Instead, they decided to make a prequel of sorts, going all the way back to the Cold War, but a Cold War that gets very hot. Just as in the previous Hell March, I intend to go through the plot, a brief description of the factions, and the impact of the game in this video. For the rest of the month, I'll release videos on in-depth analysis of the factions and finish up with a review of the two expansion packs released. With that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about what is considered to be one of the best games ever made. Imagine yourself as an avid computer game fan in 1996. You've played Command & Conquer, released the previous year, to death. You love the real-time strategy game genre and you're dying for another game to tear into. You hear that Westwood has released a sequel to this great game that you love. You rush to your local Radio Shack and see this awesome game sitting on the shelf. The cover has a new aesthetic, replacing the anonymous stone-faced warrior with a reticule watching a skirmish between a helicopter and a tank. You purchase it and rush home, installing and booting it up. As the game begins running, you are treated to an interactive menu that depicts the opening artwork in live action. This is your first indication that things are not as they were in the previous game. The opening cinematic takes place in Trinity, New Mexico in 1946. World War II has just ended. We are given a perspective of a camera used for recording purposes. Something of note is happening here. A scientist, who we will later learn to be Albert Einstein, chides his assistant for messing with the camera and demands some calculations. Einstein sits down and checks them. They engage their experimental device, and Einstein vanishes in a flash of light. The scene cuts to Landsberg, Germany in 1924, and we see a young man fresh out of prison, ready to start his meteoric rise. Einstein steps forward and calls out to the young man, calling him Hitler. The two have a brief interaction before Einstein offers his hand. When Hitler takes it, he vanishes in a flash of light, and Einstein appears back in his lab. The lab assistant rushes in and asks him if he found him. Einstein replies, "Hitler is out of the way." The assistant is ecstatic that Hitler has been removed, but Einstein is more reserved, stating, "Time will tell. Sooner or later, time will tell." The backstory is never fully stated outright in this game, but later installments fill in some of the gaps, and the rest can be deduced through normal assumptions. After the devastation of World War II, Einstein, racked with the weight of all the lives lost, hatched a daring plan. He would put his theories about time and relativism into practice and create a time machine. After his project was completed, he used it to travel into the past to right before Hitler's rise to power and removed the soon-to-be dictator, reasoning that without Hitler, Germany would never become the threat it eventually would become. And he was right, though he would never get to see the devastating results of his meddling as he returned to his own present, which had been marred by war with Germany. What his intervention did was create a branch in the timeline, where Germany never grew to superpower status and never went to war with its neighbors. Einstein had succeeded. Or had he? The thing about world events is that they are often far too complex for us to fully comprehend. Nations act as counterweights to each other. What benefits one usually hinders another, and the delicate balance in Europe is foremost in that dynamic. In the early 1930s, there were two powers that were ascendant, Germany and the Soviet Union. In our timeline, the preemptive war caused by Germany ended up crippling the Soviet Union for a while after the war, meaning it could never establish itself as the dominant power it had sought to be. However, with Germany out of the way, there was nothing to interrupt the Soviet Union's rise to power. World War II came to be, just as it did in our timeline, But this time it was instigated by a powerful Soviet onslaught that took Europe by surprise and caught the entirety of what would become the Allied forces by complete surprise. From the end of Einstein's prescient words about time revealing consequences, we are introduced to one of the coolest soundtracks in all of gaming and the namesake for the series, Hell March. This chilling song opens to the sound of marching troops and a man yelling intelligible commands in German. The music builds slowly before exploding into a rock ballad for the ages. Just listen to this. Unlike the grungy industrial sounds of the original's music, Red Alert takes a much more traditional sound for its rock soundtrack that I think fits the older aesthetic a little better. The music plays over clips of the different war machines gearing up for conflict, giving us a taste for the expanded battlefield we're about to partake in. It was the perfect way for Westwood to show the player that this is going to be a different experience than what was expected. The final scene of this opening is particularly chilling. The music dies out, leaving only that constant marching sound as a dagger stabs into a map of Europe and Soviet red overtakes everything. Message received, Westwood. Message received. Despite all the obvious changes to the game, at its most basic it is the same as Command and Conquer. It depicts a war between two factions for control of the world. The factions have vastly different resources, capabilities, armaments, wartime ethos, and command structure. On one side, you have the aggressor, the Soviet Union war machine, washing across Europe like an unstoppable red wave, intent on fulfilling Joseph Stalin's dream of a manifest destiny. On the other side is the Allied forces, on the defensive near the beginning, just trying their hardest to stave off disaster while they immobilize whatever forces are left. At the two sides' disposal is an entire arsenal of heavy weaponry, advanced technology, and weapons of mass destruction. Just as with the previous games, the two sides are vastly differentiated by their weapon variety and capabilities. Unlike the previous game, there's much more variability in the weapons available, and the strengths and weaknesses have been swapped. In Command and Conquer, the good faction had the more advanced technology and heavier weapons, like the Mammoth tank, MRLS, and the Orca, while Nod, the bad faction, had the smaller, cheaper, more amassable forces of a faction that was patching together its arsenal. Here, the Soviet Union has the definite power advantage with the heavy tank, the Mammoth tank, and the MiG, and the good Allied forces employs the smaller attacking force. It's a nice change up to the formula. Once again, more in-depth discussion of the factions is in coming videos. Just as with the previous game, we are given an intriguing story that unfolds across the war with both sides grappling with different challenges. The Allies are caught flat-footed and spend the early stages of the war just trying to slow the Soviet Union down, rescuing captured assets and mobilizing to put up any kind of resistance it can. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, is blitzing Europe with great success, but subterfuge and jockeying for position may undo the war effort before it can succeed. And who is that mysterious man whispering in the Premier's ear? More on that later. Each faction is presented with the European map before every mission, just as in Command and Conquer, and then the player can choose which route they want to take. Most of the time, the mission is the same regardless of which route the player chooses to take, but the map is different. This provides a little replayability in the game for future run-throughs. Some of the missions give you nearly endless resources that allow you to unfurl the entirety of your military might against the enemy, while others give you a set amount of forces and require you to get really creative to achieve your goals. The mission variety of both factions keeps the game fresh and presents an ever-shifting challenge. As far as the mechanics of the game, on the surface it plays much like the original. You build a base and flesh out your tech tree, gather resources, amass an appropriate force, and destroy your enemy to achieve your goal. Pretty simple and straightforward, but it's the nuance that sets this game above its predecessor. First of all, the setting of the game means no Tiberium, so Westwood swapped it out for ore, which means the environmental threat posed in the first game is no longer present. Infantry can traverse over ore patches without the risk of death or mutation. The resource gathering mechanic remains the same, with a harvester being dispatched from a refinery to gather resources. Another noteworthy change is the ability to build base structures spaced out. In the original game, buildings had to be built touching one another, so you were either forced to pile all your base buildings on top of each other, making it very susceptible to attack, or waste money and time building sandbag bridges to space the buildings out. This was a great change to the game that continued on in every subsequent game and became even more important with the increased power of future superweapons. The nuclear bomb from Red Alert 2 would wipe out a Command and Conquer base. In addition to the land and limited air combat from the original game, Red Alert saw the introduction of sea combat, which would remain a mainstay of the Red Alert series moving forward. The Allied military brings a whole variety of naval vessels to bear against the invaders, including the gunboat, destroyer, and cruiser. To counter this, the Soviets employ death from below with their submarine fleet, and what the Soviets lack in naval force, they make up for in their aerial capabilities using the Yak, Badger, MiG, and Hind aircraft to batter the Allied forces. This expansion of the arsenal really allowed Westwood to further the faction distinctions from the previous game to an even higher level. The factions are still unbalanced, depending upon the mission parameters, but they are far more even. This balancing will continue into the future, but this is where it really started. The final bit of improvement in the game was the enemy AI. I spoke about the faulty AI from the first game that could be easily tricked and preyed upon. Westwood stepped up the quality of the enemy AI in this game. We're not talking about world beaters or anything, but there's a definite level of thinking beyond the most obvious coded response of the previous entry. You'll always get a bigger challenge from a human who can think outside the box and do unexpected things, but there is clear improvement in Red Alert. Frank Kopacki brought an entirely different style of sound to this game, while pulling over some of the industrial sounds from the previous entry. The soundtrack was voted the best soundtrack of 1996 by PC Gamer and GameSlice magazines, demonstrating just how impactful the music for this game was. Kopacki was able to strike that rare balance between creating something that definitely belongs with the previous game, but is also definitely something of its own kind as well. He also managed to create a significant sound difference between the two franchises moving forward. Listening to the Red Alert soundtrack and then moving to Red Alert 2, you can hear similar leitmotifs and themes that carry over as part of the Red Alert sound. The same is true of the Tiberium series moving forward as well. I can't play all of it, but if you don't have access to this game, the soundtrack is available pretty much anywhere you can listen to music. Do yourself a favor and give it a listen. Red Alert became the seventh best selling game of 1996 and remained the eighth best selling game in 1997. By the end of 1999, the game had sold over 800,000 copies in the United States alone and multiple millions worldwide. It garnered great reviews based primarily on the enhanced battlefield options, rebalanced difficulty, and unit variety. It won awards for Best Strategy and War Game and placed highly in others. It was overall the best way to follow up a successful game and provided game designers with the perfect blueprint. Take what worked from the first, make it better, add greater features, and above all, don't betray what the game series is at its core. Unfortunately, this last lesson was lost on EA when they decided to continue the franchise, but we'll get with that later. At the end of the first video of this series when talking about Command & Conquer, I said I would recommend the game if you like older games and can overlook some of its shortcomings. I can honestly say that caveat is not needed here. This game holds up even today. As long as you have a computer that can run an older game optimally, or you get the new updated Steam version, it's great to have. All the problems that plagued the first game and made it harder for modern gamers to play are gone. If you like real-time strategy games, this is a definite game to put on your list to play. We will continue Hellmarch next week with an in-depth discussion of the Allied forces, and we'll see what they have available to withstand the Soviet onslaught. In the meantime, what's your favorite video game soundtrack? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching.